This is our overview of cyber.org's cybersecurity course. We will also be doing a very quick sneak peek of the cyber range as well. Gerardo, what I can do is the email summary after this PD. I can send out a copy of the PowerPoint itself. So you don't currently have access to this, but I'll gladly send out an email that includes this PowerPoint itself. Getting started, my name is Jonathan Bartles. With me, I have Jeff Holcomb. So as I work through this presentation, our session here, if you do have any questions, you are welcome to drop them in chat. I will try to keep an eye on the chat itself. Every now and then I get too focused on presenting and may miss something. So Jeff will help answer some questions. And if there's anything that he deems absolutely crucial, he will cut me off in the middle of speaking to address any questions that may be asked as we go through this. If you ever need to get in contact with anyone at cyber.org, it's always just first name dot last name at cyber.org. So for example, if you want to get a hold of me, it would be jonathan.bartles at cyber.org. You don't actually need the capital letters. It's just the autocomplete. When you hit the period, it capitalized Jonathan. And then for Jeff, when you hit the period there, it capitalized Jeff. And I say Jeff. Is it Jeff or is it Jeffrey is your email? Now that
It's Jeff. Yeah, you got it.
Jeff. Okay.
Yeah.
Some people do have a few emails that can work, like Dr. Chuck Gardner. You get, I think, charles.gardner at cyber.org, but also just he's got Chuck at cyber.org. Yeah, Gerardo, actually, that's a great question. This slide here, we do have a bit.ly link. If you want to get access to my classroom, because we will do a little run through after we take a look at all of the materials on Canvas, that bit.ly link right there should direct you to this Excel sheet. And if you want to put your name by one of these sets of credentials, you're welcome to do that. We will be using these credentials in a bit to run through our credential harvesting lab. So if you want to jump ahead, you could log in at apps.cyber.org and then use those login credentials. But that's jumping a few steps ahead. So our objectives for this workshop, we will be talking about who we are. I've already done a brief introduction with our names, but we'll go into a little more detail about who we are individually and who we are at cyber.org. We can briefly define what a cyber range is. We'll look at the material that we have written that coincides with that range, the cybersecurity course. And we'll take a look at a lab that shows how the range functions. Raymond, that's a great question. If you already have login credentials for the range, make sure to use the ones that I've provided from the bit.ly link so you're in my classroom, so you'll be able to communicate with each of the machines in that classroom. If you're referencing just the actual cyber.org curriculum, that's great. That would be your own login, and we'll get there momentarily. These numbers are always being updated. So cyber.org, I'll introduce myself first. My name is Jonathan Bartles. Originally, I was a math and science teacher, did some curriculum writing. And then about 4 years back, I was called, and this was right as NYSERC was changing their name to cyber.org to help write some cybersecurity curriculum that at the time was aligned to CompTIA's Security Plus 501 objectives. And since then, I've been writing a lot of the CompTIA certification aligned materials. So our IT fundamentals, our Network Plus, our Linux Plus, our cybersecurity, so the Security Plus course. Those are a lot of what I've done. I was a co-architect of the cyber range as well, so that's been the majority of the things that I've been a part of with cyber.org. And with me, I have Jeff Holcomb, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hey, yeah, I'm Jeff Holcomb, and I've been working with cyber pretty much since I started teaching and cyber kicked off. Spent most of my time in the same position you're in, implementing the curriculum, working with projects, and doing camps and things like that with cyber.org. After I did that for about 15 years, I moved into the district level. I worked as a science curriculum coordinator and a STEM specialist. Again, was able to implement all the cyber programs throughout our district. Then I went on to the state. I worked for Louisiana Department of Education. Then I was able to implement some of the cyber programs statewide. We had some STEM pathways that we did, and we used cyber's curriculum for that. Then I went to work in a district as a CTE supervisor, and again use their curriculum as part of the pathway that we did for students to work their way into cyber careers. Then I retired from there, and then started working here about 2 months ago. So I'm on month two.
Thanks, Jeff. So these numbers, the 27,111, the 28,610, these are always updating. So even this slide, even though it's relatively fresh, is probably outdated with information. We at cyber.org, we are here to help bridge that cyber workforce shortage that the federal government views as a national security problem. You will see the CISA stamp throughout all of our materials. We are fully subsidized, so fully funded by CISA, which is umbrellaed under the Department of Homeland Security. CISA, I know it's really small, so you can't see that. If you don't know what that stands for, is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So there's never a question of how much does this cost you. It's fully subsidized. You've already paid for it through taxation. And it's not one of those free trials where you sign up and in 3 months, all of a sudden, hey, it's now $50. Nope, fully subsidized. Going to stay free for you, always stays free for you. As long as you've gotten access to our curriculum once, you have access for life, and you're not getting access to just an individual course, you're actually getting access to all of our materials. The cyber range. So a good analogy, if you're unfamiliar with what a cyber range is to kind of compare it to like a chemistry classroom. Chemistry classrooms, right? We've got our chemicals, our experiments. We try to do that in a protected, safe environment. It's the same thing with a cyber range. So we've got this virtual environment where we're able to test different penetration testing tools, different types of malware. So both the construction of the malware as if we're the malicious actor, and then play the role of the victim to see the mistakes the victim makes to get infected with that malware. But it's all done in an isolated environment so that it can't sneak out into the real world. We have ICMP traffic blocked. We do have a small allowed list, so students are able to access some things through the internet through the virtual machine, but not a lot of things. Usually just those that are either directly in line with a lab that we have written, or we may have some teachers that have asked for access to individual websites that have good tools. But it is a very small list. For example, you couldn't go to espn.com and get information from there. You can do a Google search. It would display a lot of information, but then you try to click one of the links and the redirect would be blocked, for example. If you don't already have access to our materials, there's a little QR scan there for you. But in that introduction email that was sent out that gave guidance on getting access to both the curriculum at cyber.org and access to the range at apps.cyber.org. If you were unaware, those are two separate logins. Those are two separate password databases. So if you've had access to the curriculum for a while, but you have not applied to the range, you don't automatically have access to the range. You'd have to also apply there, and we'll show some of that in a bit. Just a sneak peek of some of the courses that we do have to offer. That cybersecurity course, which is targeted for 9 through 12. That's what we'll be taking a look at today. The cybersecurity basics, which is targeted for K through 8. Networking, another one of those CompTIA certified courses, etc. So let's go take a look at the curriculum. So we'll go to cyber.org, and let me copy and paste that link in there. It's always really easy to remember. The name of the company is the same as the name of the website. If you don't already have access to our materials, there is a sign up button. Click sign up. There's a series of questions. It'll take about 2 minutes to answer. It is always recommended to use your educator's email to gain access here. If you use a personal email, it's a little more difficult for us to verify that you are a K through 12 educator, but we do use that term educator fairly loosely. I have a bad habit from a math teacher when I was in high school. Anytime things were in quotations, this is how he'd say it. And when I say educator, it's the same thing because it's kind of educator in quotes. Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts of America are able to get access to our materials. Some after school programs are able to get access to our materials, but it's a lot easier for us to verify if you do use an educator's email because this is human verified. It is not done automatically. The people that are in charge of verifying that receive thousands of requests a day because there are bots trying to get access to our stuff. They see the term cybersecurity and think it might be something really useful. Maybe there's security clearance, maybe there's information that they shouldn't have, like access to school information, access to energy, access to healthcare. So that's why we get pinged. That's why we verify by human. All right. Once you do get access, and it should take anywhere from about 24 to 72 hours, so please be patient if you don't already have access. You then be able to click your login. I have already logged in, which is why it takes me direct to my dashboard here. Some educators have had access for a while, and they may not have logged into cyber.org in a bit to see the restructure of the dashboard. It used to take you to the landing page that had all of the courses all at once. We've now grouped them together by grade band. We're taking a look at the high school grade band because that's where our cybersecurity course lives. Don't be confused. This lock on that logo, the icon for the cybersecurity course, does not mean you are locked out of it. It is just part of the image itself. We have had an educator in the past that had reached out and said they couldn't get access to it. It was locked. It took us a while to realize what they were referencing. It's literally just part of the image itself. One thing that will confuse you, notice my cursor as I hover over cybersecurity. Definitely looks like I can click cybersecurity. And if I hover past that, it goes back to my regular cursor. Clicking the cybersecurity itself actually isn't a redirect. You have to click the image. That's the only thing that will redirect us to the course. So the lock doesn't mean anything. It's just part of the image. Clicking the word, which looks like it should redirect, won't redirect. You have to click the image itself to open up this material. Now, before we investigate some of this information here, some of the materials that we have, I've mentioned a little bit of CompTIA, and I want to be clear, we don't partner with CompTIA. The reason why we have written materials to CompTIA Security Plus, back when I started, a lot of states did not have state standards. There were 4 to 6 that did have some cybersecurity standards. We found that aligning to CompTIA's Security Plus kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone. There was roughly a 95% overlap amongst the objectives from CompTIA Security Plus and the state standards that had been released. And as more have been released, we're still hitting that like 95%. And really the only 5% that may be missing is typically found in other courses like our IT fundamentals, cyber society, network plus. So we typically hit 100% of state standards. Do want it to be clear though, we're all educators. We know that states can be 5 years behind industry. Currently, what we have written our materials to is CompTIA's Security Plus SY0701 objectives. Depending on the state, they may be making a push towards certification. So for example, I know Georgia's making a push towards certification. They really want you to work off of the 701 objectives. Some other states are more towards a specific set of standards, which may align more with the 601 objectives, we've got you covered there too. These objectives in general, they'll cover threats, attacks, vulnerabilities, risk management, cryptography, access management. The big difference between the 601 and the 701 objectives, 601 had a lot more to do with penetration testing tools. And what CompTIA did was kind of remove some of those tools from 601 to create an additional objective called Pen Test Plus. And they added some more business operations into 701. So there's the differences between 601 and 701, removed some of the penetration testing tools, added business operations. Now, CompTIA does recommend that I'm using the term students because really they're targeting adults, but we're advertising this for high schoolers. They want to experience 2 years of experience in IT administration with a security focus. We understand that students can't get that. They're full-time students. If they're starting freshman, sophomore, they might not even be old enough to even have a job. We have a workaround for that. The exams are not cheap. The Security Plus is currently an error not found. I'm sorry, 404. Always get confused there. No jokes, I know, Jeff. It's currently $404. That's if you're walking in off the street, taking the test without vouchers. There are vouchers everywhere. And I see we just had someone pass the 6-1 exam last week. Congratulations. Yeah, there are vouchers available. For example, if you would purchase a lot of the like practice test materials, those will typically have like a 10% voucher. There are educator vouchers available. So I would never say just pay that price blindly. Always look for vouchers to try to get that cost down. The certificate itself is good for 3 years. So even though we do say that this is appropriate for some freshmen, if they would get that certification the freshman year, it would expire before they graduate. Now, CompTIA, if you do get another certification, it renews that 3-year period. So if they did it in kind of an awkward order and maybe got Security Plus first and then maybe Network Plus later, it would re-up that 3 years. I always like to recommend starting in the order that CompTIA recommends, and we'll take a look at CompTIA stuff in a bit. I do have a set of pros and cons. Security Plus does look great on a resume. A lot of businesses, it's not that they completely ignore the certifications before Security Plus, like IT Fundamentals Plus, A Plus, and Net Plus, but having that Security Plus really puts you a step above the rest. If you're looking to apply to a job that has administrative rights, they'll essentially not look at applicants that don't have Security Plus. You have Security Plus that gets you in the door. There's less content than the A Plus. The A Plus material is almost 3 semesters worth of material if we were to have it in the high school space, and it's 2 tests. The other con is that it can be difficult. So, for example, I'll give my experience with the 601 exam. Now, this is different from the 701 exam, but they do like to ask the questions, which is best? They'll give you 4 choices. 2 choices that are good, 2 choices that don't make any sense at all. And unfortunately, which is best isn't always which is best. You have to know which is best according to CompTIA. It can be a challenge. And when 33 of your 74 questions are which is best, they get you sweating. I know from experience. Now, the experience itself, because they can't get that 2 years of work experience, that's what we have these labs for. Nowhere where you really see us mention the 3 types of labs with example labs, tool labs, and attack labs, but that's kind of a way you can categorize these different types of labs. This is a good way to help students understand what they need to know for the exam. One of the example labs would be our fuzzing lab, where students use a tool called OWASP ZAP. OWASP stands for the Open Web Application Security Project. ZAP is just the Z attack proxy. We already have that installed on the Kali Linux machine on the Cyber Range. It has a lot of tools, not just fuzzing. It has spiders, Ajax spiders, works through SQL injection. The fuzzing lab itself also implements SQL injection, brute force, a lot of things like that. Tool labs. So, for example, we take a look at an application called Wireshark, which is used to capture packets, view packets, understand packets. And then you could even go further than that and see how to use packets maliciously and the dangers of using internet in an internet cafe or when we connect to something that doesn't require a password. I always make jokes when I'm presenting in person and we've connected to internet that didn't require a password, or the password was something very simple, because there could just be an adversary in the middle just capturing traffic and very easily access things that we would think are private and aren't private because of the way that the network is set up. The third type of lab is the attack labs, and one of the most popular ones we have is the ransomware lab, which uses the actual WannaCry payload, which about a decade ago nearly wrecked the internet. It's very, very dangerous ransomware. The cyber range keeps everything isolated. We don't have any concerns about that sneaking out into the real world. And modern machines recognize the signature of WannaCry and make it near impossible, not entirely impossible, but you have to go out of your way to get your computers infected with WannaCry today. But with the ransomware lab, students understand how ransomware attacks work and understand how to defend against it. That's one of those ones where proactivity is much better than reactivity. Now, I have mentioned Security Plus. The website from CompTIA takes you directly there, is that link. That takes you to this landing page here where you can scroll through some information. Again, we are not CompTIA. We don't partner with CompTIA. We just wrote the materials to align there because it aligns with state standards and is good for certifications in industry. They've got information here, and there's more information that you can find on CompTIA's website. I always forget how to find this directly. Is it roadmap? There's a way to check the different pathways. Let's see, core pathway. Yeah, here we go. So CompTIA recommends starting with this core pathway, which starts with IT Fundamentals Plus, leads into A Plus, into Network Plus, and then into Security Plus. And that's really a nice high school breakdown there, a good 4 years. The IT Fundamentals Plus, if you've been following CompTIA, they're replacing that with what they call Tech Plus, but it's like 95% of the same material. It's just really an update of everything. There are additional certifications past this. So if you're looking for like a server pathway, you'd follow Security Plus into Linux Plus and then Server Plus. If you're looking at, and I forget the exact name of it, but more towards the cybersecurity path, and it might be the cybersecurity pathway. It'd be Pen Test Plus, what is it, CYSA Plus, CSAP Plus. So there are additional certifications there. We don't cover the other things outside of Linux. We do have a Linux course, and I have a workshop on Friday if people are looking forward to attending that. All right. So back to the material itself on Canvas here. And be aware that your school may use Canvas. This is a separate Canvas page. Right? This is our Canvas page that we're hosting. You can extract the materials and import them into yours, so you can download them from our Canvas and upload them to your Canvas. Currently, this is structured where us at cyber.org are the teachers, and you as educators are the students. So you have access to download all of this material, but we have access in terms of changing any of the files themselves. Now, I've mentioned the 701 objectives. I mentioned the 601 objectives. The landing page here takes you to the 701 objectives. If your school, your state, your district, whomever makes the final decision in terms of what you need to teach, if they want you going more by state standards that are aligned to the 601 content, you can click this to get redirected. It looks very similar in structure. It just has material for the 601 objectives instead of the updated 701 objectives, which has more business operations. You could also click this CompTIA Security Plus objective order. This is not a great way to teach an order if you're trying to teach the entirety of the 701 objectives or similarly the 601 objectives, but it is listed there. And that aligns to those objectives. I'm going to click that link there. So if you do want to copy in PDF format, we can see the list of objectives direct from CompTIA. It gives a breakdown of their 5 units, examples of their objectives, and we have written to every single objective on the list. We have a few supplemental resources before we get down into the materials themselves. There were a few case studies that were really great content in the 601, but didn't fit anywhere in with the 701. So that's still up here at the top. A few other pieces of information here at the top there. And the 601 content has some things like the Linux 101 and 102 labs, the Fun with Linux labs. If students haven't used Linux before, you can always reference that. Now, getting down into what we've written for the course, we do have this broken down. The numbering scheme here is because of the numbering from CompTIA's order. So you see this, you see the 2.1.1, the 1.2.1, that doesn't follow an order. That's because that's from the objective list from CompTIA. We reorganized this into a better flowing, a better teaching approach. So if you do want to go through the entirety of the course, you can. This is modular though. So if you have materials that you already like and you just want to supplement with a few things, you're able to do that. If you've got another course and you just want to introduce some other things, that's fine too. We've got a lot of information here for you. Each of these units do have a lesson plan here. So we see unit 1, the actors, motivations, CIA, and authentication. The lesson plan here gives you a breakdown in terms of approximate time for that unit. It lets us know which topics are covered and any of the resources, which includes the labs, the case studies, and any additional resources. All right, so it's got a breakdown here. Every unit has this information. Now we can take a look at some of the materials that we have written. So the lesson notes, let's see if I can find one I really like. Let's look at the malware one, because I always like referencing the malware case study. So all of these lesson notes are structured the same. They have a little lesson overview at the top, a guiding question, and then any objective or objectives that the lesson is written to. And then it goes through and provides information on that objective. We try to have every lesson about 1 to 2 pages of material. Some are a little shorter, some are a little longer, so you can pair some things together, you can split some things apart. But malware, it's got all the different types of malware here. There's nothing in the lesson notes that cannot be shared with students. So if I were presenting in class, the way that I would do this, and it would depend on if we're more paper focused or if everyone happens to have like their own tablets or Chromebooks or whatnot, I would be dispersing lesson notes and guided notes to each of the students, and I'd present the PowerPoint up on my whiteboard or projection or whatever I happen to have. I may have to stop share to switch this over. The PowerPoints themselves, let's see if I can share this without stop sharing. Jeff, did that switch over to the malware PowerPoint? Yes. Okay. So the PowerPoints themselves contain information in line with the lesson notes. We can see the malware, and it's fairly short because the majority of the information is on the lesson notes, but this gives a visual that can coincide with the lesson notes themselves. So just a few slides there. The guided notes are also in PDF format. These are a set of short response questions, and they do go in order of the materials themselves from the lesson notes. So that's why I'd pass these out. I'd have students work on answering these questions in class if I were teaching. You don't have to do it this way. We do have some teachers that have it more of like a flipped classroom where they give this information to students, they do it at home, the next day the teacher reviews it. Um, we have all different types of setups. The independent study, we've had some teachers that just give students the materials and have them work through it in an independent study fashion instead of a kind of standard teaching approach. So just be aware of that. One of the reasons why you as educators are the students in the course and your students don't have direct access to this are the answer keys. And we have answer keys for both the guided notes, so those short response questions, and the quizzes themselves. So I'm going to skip over this column with the case studies and labs and take a look at the quizzes. All of these quizzes are in docx format. They are multiple choice quizzes. Let me get that correct. Share screen. So we can see this in a docx format. The quiz key has solutions to each of these. Again, that's why the students don't have access here, but you can extract all this content and import it into your own LMS, whether it's Canvas or something else. We had aimed for 10 questions per quiz, but some lessons are a little shorter than others and don't have as many. Some are a little longer than others and have more than 10. We aim for the 10. It really averages out to maybe about 8 or 9 questions overall. And you don't have to use these as individual quizzes. You can hold these off to make unit exams at the end. Just kind of treat this how you want. That's why we kept this in more of a docx format, so you had a little more flexibility with the way that you used the quizzes here. Now, for those who have taken CompTIA certification, those questions are not exactly the way that the CompTIA questions are written. We had to be very careful legally because we are not partnered with CompTIA. We couldn't quite write questions the same way they write them because they have their cert blaster that they're partnered with for their own test prep. I recommend teaching this course if you're trying to get students certified the same way that I would recommend teaching an AP course if students are trying to get AP credit. You've got the curriculum, but you supplement with practice exams. I say the same thing here. We've got the curriculum, but supplement with practice exams. You can find some that are free online. You can find some pay-to-play ones online. And a lot of those pay-to-play will have some vouchers included that you can use for taking the exam. So that's how I would do that, is supplement with practice tests. Primarily so students get to see the way that the questions are actually written for the exam. Now back to this third column of materials, we have case studies, we have labs. The case studies themselves will have an article that aligns to the objective. And what we've done is we still show the original source, but in case that is ever archived, that's ever changed, the link is broken, something happens, we have pasted that information into the case study itself. We try to have medium length articles. You may have some that are 2 paragraphs that really just are essentially a headline. You may have some that could be 10 pages. So when we were looking for information for articles that aligned to something, we tried to hit this like 1 to 2 pages of information. The malware case study itself If anyone is familiar with Marcus Hutchins, it's about him. References when he was a teenager. So this, you're using a little bit of fear mongering, but there's truth in it. How even as a teen, you can get in trouble if you are not practicing proper ethics when you're utilizing some of these tools. He created the Kronos malware. Now, he says he was threatened to create it and then sold it to the malicious actors who ended up using it to um, get some banking credentials and credit card data. Whether he was threatened or not, the truth is he made the malware, he sold it, it was used maliciously. But before he had even been captured, as an adult, he helped stop WannaCry. So he did a lot of good as he got older, as he matured. The way he was captured, he thought he was getting an award at DEF CON, and this information is in the case study here. He thought he was getting an award at DEF CON. He shows up, and the FBI arrests him. Total entrapment. So when we get down a little further, if you've presented this multiple times, there's a summary rather than having you have to read the whole article each and every, whether it's semester or year, depending on how you're teaching the course. There's a summary there for you. Then you get down to the set of questions. And we've designed a lot of these questions to be open-ended. So there's not really a right or wrong answer. So this first question, should it be legal to create malware? And this is one where you'll see a lot of people that say absolutely not, because it's in the name, mal, it's malicious. It's only used for malicious purposes. There's never any good reason to create malware. And if you're trying to learn malware and you're not containing it appropriately and it sneaks out into the real world, you've done a lot of harm. That's a good argument against the creation of malware. And then you have some people that are more on the side of essentially what we'd be doing, because we've got the labs where we're creating malware. You don't know how to defend against things if you can't replicate them yourselves, know how to prepare for them. You don't want to always be playing defense. So you create the malware to understand how it works. You understand the vulnerabilities in systems. You work on patching those. So you'll see arguments on both sides there, not really a right or wrong. I don't envy you, because you may have some students that really start to argue on the two sides here. So have a little fun there, but understand that these are open-ended to have hopefully healthy discussions. Even the second question, some people may be a little more open towards the first question, saying, yeah, maybe it should be legal to create malware. And then you may not have everyone who would be on the same side thinking it should be legal to sell malware. But we think about bug bounties. Google pays lots of money. Apple pays lots of money for people to find vulnerabilities in their software, in their different applications. Well, that's from the creation of malware. So there's a good application of actually selling malware, because essentially you're selling the malware to Apple, to Google, to Microsoft, and they're patching that so there's no further harm. The last portion with each of these case studies, the further study at the bottom, these may include some videos that align with the topic at hand. They may have some further discussion articles, maybe closer to that, like 10 to 12 pages, that it didn't make sense to have the case study on, but if you wanted more information, you could read more into it. So that's what the further studies are at the bottom. The last set of materials in this resources column are the labs. And since we'll be taking a look at the credential harvesting, I'll do a Control F here. The labs are all in a PowerPoint format. These are structured in a way that you don't have to have any idea what you're doing. They're written step by step for you. So you've got your title slide. Your next slide lets you know any of the materials that are needed. So for the credential harvesting lab, you're utilizing both the Kali Linux virtual machine and the Windows 7 virtual machine on the cyber range. And you could have your own cyber range, but understand that ours is fully subsidized and any of the files that are necessary for the lab are already included. Any of the applications are already included. The range itself is specialized to work with these labs. The labs are specialized to work with the range. The software tool that is used with the credential harvesting lab is this SET. Your next slide lets you know any of the objectives that are covered, gives a definition, step by step in terms of what we'll do, and then starts to go through the lab itself. And again, it just breaks down every step that you need, every command, and runs you through that. If it is some sort of like attack lab, the final slide lets you know how to defend against that specific type of attack. Some of the labs that are part of the backdoor series may have a slide that shows the backdoor shortcut, so you're not constantly going through the 20 minutes that it takes to manually create malware every time. There's a lab that has you create malware once, and then or create a backdoor once, and then there's a backdoor shortcut so that you're not spending half of your class period just creating the backdoor to then go further with a keylogger application or a denial of service attack or privilege escalation, a pass the hash attack, things like that. Any questions so far? We haven't taken a look at the range yet. We haven't run through a lab yet. This has just been information on the materials on Canvas with the cybersecurity course. I guess I can also show.
I'll ask.
Yes.
I'm just trying to. Can you go back to the list? Can we look at what is the expected pacing like for a given unit?
So they do differ from one unit to the next, and that's what that lesson plan is good for, where it gives you an estimation in terms of how many hours to expect that unit to take.
Got it. So it's not broken out by like lab or by case study.
Yeah, it's not broken down that much. We have too much variability where you have some of your classes that may be 50, 55 minutes. We have some that are on a block schedule that are more like 2 hours. We've had some educators that I have 2 weeks where it's 4 hours per class. And how would you do that? And because there was too much variability, we just kind of grouped it together and said, expect this amount of material to take this much time, and you can kind of divide it up amongst there.
Okay, I'll focus on that. I appreciate that because I did find a lot of variability in teaching this material last year. And some students would just race through it, and other students, they would take quite a bit more time. And then, but having what that boundary looks like in general would be useful. But
Yes.
I see the complexity there. Thank you.
Yeah. And Gerardo has a good question. Sharing the PowerPoint, there's nothing that the students can't have in terms of information from the PowerPoint for the labs. Absolutely, you can share those. You can even share the PowerPoints for the lessons as well. It's not like there's answers from the answer keys with the guided notes and the quizzes. So the lesson notes, the PowerPoints, the guided notes, the case studies, the labs, those are all information that the students are allowed to have.
If your school's like my school, I'll also say you want to do that ahead of time because you need to upload it into Schoology or whatever other share system that your school is using.
And everyone, so you are aware, you can batch download whether you call that a hamburger or the three horizontal bars. In the top left, you can click files, and that will direct you into the page where you can actually download the entirety of the 701 or the 601 files. So just be aware that you can do a batch download instead of having to download individual files, because individual files would just take forever. But if you are only wanting to pull a handful of lessons because it is modular, you can download those individually and use them as needed. Oops. All right, so let me share that bit.ly link one more time. So if you have not already grabbed a set of login credentials on that Excel sheet, and I do see some names, this is looking good. We will be running through the credential harvesting lab. So if you go to apps.cyber.org, that's apps.cyber.org. Let me get that in the channel, apps.cyber.org. The landing page has a login. If you happen to already have a login as a teacher and you're logged in, make sure to log out to log back in using the provided credentials. Or if you're able to open incognito mode, you use that feature if you don't want to have to log out. We just want to make sure that we're logged in using the set of credentials here. The column A is not the username. Column B is the username. So when you go to log in, you'll use that random looking string of characters for the username, and the password is the cybersecure and complex password of password. So random string of characters for username, password for password. As an educator, you would land into a page that looks like this where you have an add a classroom button. But since you're logging in using student logins, you'll only see my classroom. So click, I believe it just says Bartles, click Bartles, and that'll take you to a page where you see two machines that are currently up and running. You see a Kali Linux and a Windows 7. You also have access to a Windows Server 22 virtual machine and an Ubuntu Linux. The Windows Server has more functionality with the networking course, and there's a little bit with the intro to cybersecurity course that uses the Windows Server. The Ubuntu Linux is much more involved with the Linux Plus course, so our intro to Linux course that we've written. You have two choices here. You can play the role of both malicious actor and victim, or you can kind of sit back and just watch me play the role of the malicious actor and then go play the victim after I've set everything up. This is all being recorded. So if you feel more comfortable just playing victim, where you just have a few steps to go through, that would only require you using the Windows 7 virtual machine. If you want to try to set up the malicious attack yourself, that would require the Kali Linux machine. When I am utilizing multiple virtual machines, a little trick that I like to do is actually duplicate the tab. So that was a right click on that tab itself and duplicate. Some questions that we have, does the operating system of the computer that I'm using matter? No, this works on Windows. This works on Chrome OS. This works on Mac. It works on mobile, but you really want to have a detachable keyboard and a larger screen. Same thing with tablet. It can work on tablets. So if it's iOS or whatnot, it's recommended to use laptops or desktops, larger screen and the keyboard, but the OS doesn't matter. And the web browser doesn't matter. You just need to make sure that you have a computer with a web browser connected to the internet. I'm using Opera GX. Yeah, you can probably figure out the stereotypes from there. I'm a gamer, kind of appeals to me. Firefox, we've tested, works well. Safari, Edge, because no one uses Internet Explorer anymore, even though we'll be using Internet Explorer for this lab. Chrome, Chromium, I mean, any of the well-known web browsers, this all works well. Yes, Chromebook's absolutely fine, and then Chromium or Google Chrome, all of that's absolutely fine. Even Tor, if students who probably shouldn't be using the Onion router have the Onion router, all of these web browsers work fine. So I have duplicated my tab. In one of these tabs, I'm going to open the Kali Linux machine because that's where I'll be playing the role of the malicious actor. The other tab, I will be opening my Windows 7 virtual machine. because this is where I'll be playing the role of the victim. Sometimes on the Windows 7 machine, there's an activation prompt. It's supposed to close out of that when it's created. It doesn't always. We don't have an activation key. We want to keep this as vulnerable as possible, so you just close out of that if you happen to have that pop up. So again, if you want to play the role of malicious actor, you'll follow along with this. If you want to just sit back, watch me play role of malicious actor and put on my Guy Fawkes mask, that's fine too. To get started, we open up at the terminal, and that's that black rectangle with the white border in the top left. Get zoomed in a bit just in case you're on a smaller screen so you can see everything I'm typing here. This is rather easy to set up. If you remember back to the PowerPoint itself, it had referenced the social engineer or social engineering toolkit. It's not that I don't know the name. Even in the tool itself, sometimes it refers to itself as social engineer toolkit, and sometimes it refers to itself as social engineering toolkit. The name's not important. To launch that toolkit, I use the command sudo se toolkit. You don't need to know what all of this means because the PowerPoint itself just gives you the steps, but I'll break it down. Sudo, super user do. To be able to launch the SE toolkit with proper functionality, I need super user rights. So that's why I have this sudo. The user Kali is part of the sudoers group, which is why I can use the command sudo and then SE toolkit. And that's just going to launch the social engineer toolkit. So sudo SE toolkit. The first time that you launch SE toolkit on a machine, you get this terms of service. You would get this every time because the way that the range is structured is the machines self-terminate after anywhere between 2 hours and 2 hours and 59 minutes. The easy way to know when your machine's going to terminate, whenever you launch the machine, add 2 hours to that and then move that up to the 59th minute. So I launched these at, there's a way to find out. I launched these at 10:18 Central Time. I add 2 hours to that. There's 12:18. I bump that up to the 59th minute at 12:59 Central Time. These machines will self-terminate. So there's no persistence in the range. So if you're working through a lab in class, you don't finish it, you want to assign that as homework to students, they'll have to start back at the beginning. Anytime you'd want to set this up, you'd be launching a new machine, so you'd have to agree to the terms of service every time. What this terms of service is saying that we're not using this tool maliciously. We're using this tool for educational purposes. So it's just a Y for yes and enter. I do like to joke that the social engineer toolkit for the credential harvesting lab is as easy as 1, 2, 3. I repeat 1, 2, and then I act like I get distracted. We'll see the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2 in a second. So getting started. Credential harvesting is a form of social engineering. So we'll be using a social engineering attack. So I start with 1 and I hit enter. In the menu, the submenu that this brings me to, I have a few different things I can set up here, but we'll be using a website attack vector. I move on to 2, enter. And I've used that term credential harvester a few times. 3, credential harvester attack method. So 1, 2, 3, easy as 1, 2, 3. We have a few options here. In the real world, we could be cloning a website. We could be creating a custom import. So real world applications for that could be something like mimicking what could look like a gaming website because you're trying to steal credit card information from someone, or you're trying to get a backdoor on their machine or login credentials, something like that. The site cloner, you want to imitate a website. There are some web templates that are already installed. So we're going to go back to 1 because we're going to use one of the built-in web templates. So it was 1, 2, 3, back to 1. By default, the social engineer toolkit wants to communicate back to the host machine. So this IP address is the IP address of this Kali Linux machine that I'm on. I'm not going to change that, so I'm just hitting the enter button, just enter. In the real world, we could have a bunch of different types of attacks together. I could have a whole like bot master, botnet, and bot system going on where I have a lot of bots sending information back to my machine. And so I'd have a little script. I'd have to have installed SE Toolkit secretly on the machine, but that can be done if I have a backdoor to the machine. And then I'd send information back to my machine. So they'd be doing the bots, everyone else's machines would be doing all the work and just sending info back to me. So the last step here, 2. So it was 1, 2, 3, 1, enter, 2. We're going to be mimicking a Google login. Now, Google has finally updated their login page. One of the weaknesses of not constantly updating the way the login page looks is things like this, where it can just be a built-in web template for an application where malicious actors can easily set up a fake login page. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, enter, 2. So what I've done as the malicious actor, I have cloned what will look like a Google login page. In the real world, I do a little more. I buy out a domain that maybe looks like Google so that at first glance, I wouldn't recognize as the victim that I'm not at the Google webpage. We're not going to do something like that. We're just going to be directing ourselves to an IP address, which that should scream at us. Why are you at an IP address and not at google.com? I'd also try to actually distribute this somehow, whether it's through a bunch of phishing emails, like I just spam a whole bunch, or maybe I'm spear phishing where I'm aiming for a specific individual. A case study that you can look at is John Podesta. So if you remember during the 2016 election cycle, John Podesta was part of the Democrat team, and he received an email that, in terms of some of the scam ones, was rather well written. And you can find it pretty easily with a Google search. The few things that stuck out, it was a bit.ly link instead of a Google login link. So he clicks that, he enters his credentials. He didn't have multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication set up. So he just gives the malicious actors his login credentials. And that's how the email list spread during the 2016 election cycle. We're not going to get all fancy like that. So we've set everything up as the malicious actor. Now we'll go play the victim. So regardless of if you also played malicious actor or you just sat back and watched, if you want to play victim here, in that Windows 7 virtual machine, click the Internet Explorer button in the bottom left. You can use Google Chrome, but these virtual machines are very, very weak in terms of the hardware being used. You're essentially running the year 2000 laptop hardware on each of these. Google Chrome is a big resource hog. So it's not going to crash the system, but it's a little preferable for this lab to use IE instead of Chrome. So we open up IE, we just close out of this setup Windows Internet Explorer 8 prompt. The URL that we're going to, if you did not set up the SE toolkit on your Kali machine, you'll be directing to my Kali IP address. There are a few ways to get that. I could hover over the tab for a bit and it shows me my IP address. I could click the other machines button to get my IP address. I could open up another terminal and run the command hostname -I, which is actually part of the lab itself. It's the very first step is hostname -I. But that IP address is what I want to navigate to in IE on the Windows 7 virtual machine. If you played the role of malicious actor on your Kali Linux machine. You want to go to your Kali Linux IP address. I'm fine either way. If you go to yours, if you set it up, if you go to mine, the more people that go to mine will see a bunch of credentials captured at the same time. So I'm navigating to my Kali IP address, 10.15.113.43. And what it takes me to is what used to be, in terms of appearance, a Google login page. Again, the things that should stick out, had Google not updated their login page, visually, nothing would really look off, but the URL isn't Google. Again, I could buy a domain and make it look like Google. Maybe I use some Russian characters that look like English characters, and I'm none the wiser. I believe Google has purchased out the domain Google with 3 O's, so that typo would officially be Google. Microsoft actually has the dirty jobs guy, Mike Rowe. So if you type MikeRoweSoft.com, it redirects to Microsoft's website. So some of these really big companies do try to protect the user a bit and buy out some domains that could be simple typos of their actual domain. So just be aware of that. At this point, before anyone's entered credentials, and if you've already entered credentials, that's okay. But I've already captured some credentials, yes. What happens is I start getting some hits. So my Kali machine lets me know machines have already accessed my web page, and it gives me the IP addresses of the machines that have accessed my web page. And if they've entered credentials, I actually start capturing those in plain text. So I see I really hope that's not a real set of credentials there. There's no numbers, so that should be fine. john.smith@gmail.com and a password. 06 user, some great PW. Like, it's not even encrypted. It's not hashed. It's plain text. I literally see the email and the password in plain text. So I'll go play victim myself. So of course I zoomed up to the top, and now the zoom bar's in the way. Let's close out of this, close out of this. There we go. So I could enter a set of credentials. So say I'm logging into Google, so it's a Gmail account, and this is a secure. Lots of characters. It must be super secure, right? I click sign in, and the way IE views this, it actually thinks this is a proper login because it's asking if it wants to remember the password. It doesn't matter if I click yes or no. So remember, the URL was an IP address. One other thing that should stick out is the fact that I didn't actually sign in. I have been redirected to Google's login page, but I didn't sign in. If I have multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication set up, think about what the primary second way to access an account is on a new device. You get a text message, phone, digital, you get a text message. So if all of a sudden I get a text message saying that I'm trying to log in somewhere, and I'm not trying to log in somewhere, someone's got my credentials. Because they're not always going to be sitting directly at a computer waiting for something to happen. They've sent out thousands of emails. They'll check later in the day and they'll see, oh, I've got a bunch of hits here. Let me try some of these credentials. Since John Podesta didn't have multi-factor authentication set up, they just logged in right away. I get a text message asking if I'm trying to log in. I better not say yes. But that lets me know somehow someone got my credentials, whether it was through my fault by something like this, or maybe there's another AT&T password database breach and someone on the dark web paid $500 for that list, figured out my login credentials, and attempted to log in. And if I'm doing the not cyber secure thing of using the same login credentials from one application to the next, maybe I try Jonathan.Bartles at Chase Bank, and I try this is a secure password with a little bit of leet speak, and I get into Chase Bank if multi-factor authentication isn't set up. So, ways to kind of defend against this. You've got multi-factor authentication set up, so it adds that extra layer of protection. You get that text message, go change your password. Don't use the same set of login credentials from one application to the next. So even with like cyber.org, right? You've got a login credentials for Canvas, you've got a login credentials for the range. They're two separate password databases. Yes, both are cyber.org, but they're two separate ones. I would recommend not using the same set of login credentials. Because if you use the same set of login credentials and heaven forbid something happened and our password database is leaked somewhere, someone figures out login credentials. Hey, this person's used the same login credentials across multiple platforms. Maybe it's also their Facebook login. Maybe it's also their US Bank login, etc. So we can see some dangers there. And as long as I keep this running, I'll keep capturing stuff. You could refresh the web page and re-enter some login credentials back on that Windows machine. So that's how that credential harvester works. It's really easy to set up. And as a malicious actor, I wouldn't even go through the steps. I'd have a little script that even does all that for me. That just does that sudo se toolkit 1 2 3 1 enter 2, sends out a bunch of emails. Maybe I buy a domain, maybe I don't. Like if I'm super cheap, I don't buy a domain, but then I probably won't have as much success. So some of the dangers there. Any questions with any of that? Little sneak peek of the range. Yeah, what you could do, Joe. So those other two built-in web templates. So one is, it says Twitter, which is now X. You could just change that. Now it would redirect to Twitter, but Twitter is not on the allowed list, so it would redirect to a blocked page. You could have them go a little further if you had your own little GitHub. You could make your own custom website, so you could use one of those other features with the custom import, but you'd have to have them do a git clone to pull from GitHub and then figure out the slight changes to getting SE Toolkit to work with that command. But that's an extension to that. Would you please go through the timeline for request? Okay, so as long as you have access to the range, so you've applied at apps.cyber.org, and let me log out and get back to the start. So I've logged out, apply for access, same type of questions when you applied for access to cyber.org for the curriculum. Answer through that. That's also human verified, about 24 to 72 hours. Once you get access to that, if you're going to run through a lab in class, you can do this at the start of class. Like as students are kind of rolling in, you can click the launch VMs button. You can pick which machine or machines. Now you can only do one machine at a time. So if you're doing both the Kali Linux and the Windows 7, we'd have to do one for the Kali Linux. And let me add a new user so we can actually see that. So launch VMs, Kali Linux. I can select all that don't already have a Kali Linux up and running, and doing this just on the spot. It takes anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes for the machines to get launched. You don't want to do this at 8 a.m. for a 2 p.m. class because the machines self-terminate after 2 hours to 2 hours and 59 minutes. But if your class starts at 8 You can launch these at 8. You can do your introduction, and then everyone can log in. And the students themselves are able to launch their own machines. So if you exit out of the virtual machine back into your page, looks a little different than this because you're in the student login. There's the launch machine button. So you can launch those machines. You wait that 3 to 5 minutes, and then you can connect. So that can happen just minutes before running through the lab.